Hello, and welcome to the Remote Podcast Episode 6. This podcast is all about location independence, digital nomadism, and living life on your own terms. Each week we interview a new guest on the show, and this week I sat down with Singh, the co-founder of Domino, an invite-only community of freelancers to share their extra work with the people they know and trust. The big themes we cover today include 1. Our frustrations with the theoretical nature of the education system. 2. The importance of pivoting and tweaking your ideas based on feedback. And 3. The future of work, in particular, freelancing. We cover a lot of ground in this episode. We discuss Alex's experiences growing up and attending school in Australia, his decision to drop out and pursue photography, how he built up his own photo agency, and more. From there, we talk about how Alex moved to New York City and started pursuing new entrepreneurial ideas, how he learned graphic design, and the story behind Domino. So let's get started. Hey, Alex, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today. So for those of you who don't know, Alex is one of the co-founders of Domino, an invite-only community for freelancers to share their extra work with the people they know and trust. And there's so many things I want to get into in the podcast today, because from stalking you online to things I've heard from other people who know you, I know you've hopped around from Australia to New York, you used to do photography, now you're doing design, business development. So I just want to get into all of that. So to start off, I think a good place to start would be at the very beginning, the humble origin of your Aussie accent.
Fair enough. Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. So I was born and raised in Sydney. And after graduating from high school, I sort of went and did university, tried that out, studied business, and struggled with its kind of it's how would I put this? It's very sort of theory focused subject matter,
right.
And I was really wanting to try something more practical, and so I decided to drop out and fell into photography. And purely through absolute chance. And I ran into this guy called Wes, who became a very close friend of mine.
Uh-huh.
And actually out one night, we just got chatting. I found out he was a photographer, and he lent me his camera. And he had a spare. And he basically taught me and trained me up. And he became a very good friend of mine and then a business partner of mine. And we started a photo agency in Sydney, where we'd basically, this is when I was in my early 20s, kind of like 22, 23 or something. So we'd go out and just go to different parties and concerts and that sort of thing, and take photos and publish them to a site online, and that got more and more traction, more traffic, and so then a lot of music festivals and nightclubs and record labels started wanting us to work with them, and so it kind of grew from there. And that led us to bringing on more photographers and training more photographers, and the business, sort of evolving. And based on the work that we did, I was fortunate enough to be able to get a work visa to the United States and to move to New York to continue pursuing photography there. So that's a brief rundown of
you covered a lot of years there. So I wanted to pick apart different parts of that experience.
Sure.
First off, you mentioned how you felt like your college education was very much theoretical.
Uh-huh.
The classroom education didn't really match up with what you wanted to learn. And I felt the same way as well, but I'd love to hear more about what specifically turned you off when it came to college. What expectations did you have going into school, and how did that mismatch kind of play out?
Right. So I've never really gelled with the current structure of academic education. I feel that it's too theoretical. I feel that there is too much of a disconnect in the sort of like the actual dynamics of teaching, with the idea of this teacher who sort of hands down, their knowledge and their wisdom. Or at least that's how it's perceived when you're, when you're 10 years old or 16 years old or whatever it might be. And, I really struggled with that, and I craved the opportunity to go out and learn myself, and to not be constrained within a sort of set coursework. and that was true of high school, and so I switched off very much then. And I hoped that university would be different, and I found that it wasn't. And so, yeah, ultimately, what I was after was an opportunity, basically freedom, I guess, freedom to learn, freedom to to explore a diverse range of topics. Obviously around a specific subject matter, but something that allowed for me to pursue an education that was self-directed, and that was grounded more in in sort of the day-to-day realities of, in this case, of business, rather than worrying about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the four M's of marketing or whatever it was called,
Yeah.
And that was out. I felt that was outdated, or at least too theoretical back then. So I mean, I've got no idea what the case is now, but I'm sure it's even more out of date.
It's still the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's still out of date, probably even more so.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I think you very much encapsulated the feeling that many millennials go through and what a lot of freelancers go through that make them make the jump. So I'm curious, back then in Australia, was there a very strong freelancing community? Did you know that freelancing was an option, or did meeting your friend Wes kind of change the game for you because it opened up an entire new set of realities and possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I knew of freelancing as a concept. None of my friends that I can think of had freelanced or had any exposure to it. They all sort of jumped into 9-to-5 jobs. I didn't have many. I'm trying to think. I don't think I knew anyone that was like a photographer or a musician, or was doing anything outside of this sort of standard stricture of like the 9-to-5 sort of model of employment. And so that was definitely it was definitely an insight. I always knew that or at least I had a desire to run my own business or to be an entrepreneur from a very, very young age. Maybe once again because of that desire for freedom, or to be able to sort of set your own goals and to set your own expectations and your own path. I really don't know. I assume that was a principal motivator. But I guess the photography thing was as I said, I fell into it, and that was what opened my eyes. And as I said to you, I struggled with university because it was too theoretical. Well, it was very much a trial by fire going into photography, because it's taking photographs is sort of 10. If you're lucky, it's like 20% of it. And this is true of any profession, and especially any creative profession. Most people think that it's that you're kind of in a studio where you're running around town taking photos all day, and that's simply not the case. There's a huge business component that goes to it, and if you don't learn those skills and develop those skills, then you will never be successful, I don't think, unless you're very, very lucky.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I'd love to get deeper into photography, but before I do that, I'm wondering, when you made that jump to leave university to do photography, what did that feel like? Was it a very scary move? Was there any pushback from family, from friends? And how did you manage the expectations from other people versus your own desire to do your own thing?
Right. So I'm incredibly blessed to have a very supportive family, and as much as I'm sure they'd wished I'd gone down a more traditional path, or at least back then, because you kind of, your value system is informed by those that you spend time with, and in your broader social circle, right? So the expectation is,
Right.
Go to university, get a good job, all the rest of it, and I just struggled to and ultimately couldn't follow that path. And so at the point that I was ready to leave university, my parents were had sort of experienced enough of my sort of so this kind of experimental approach to to living, or to trying to grow. Because as I said, I was in my early 20s. I was a child. I had no idea who I was, or what I was, what I wanted to do or anything like that. And so they did give me the support to figure that out without any pressure. And with respect to my friends, all of them were pretty cool with it. None of them judged it, at least not to my face. And yeah, I mean, think about it. I was getting paid, not much to be fair, but getting paid to take photographs at nightclubs and concerts and to go on tour and music festivals. I mean, it's while they're stuck in an office doing, I don't know, accounting or, finance or something like that. So, I mean, it probably sounds pretty cool,
definitely.
While you're stuck indoors. Yeah.
So did you start learning photography part-time while you were still a student, or did you just take a complete leap of faith and immerse yourself 100%?
Yeah, I dived straight into it as soon as I met Wes. So I basically had the idea of, there was this famous, he's still around now, but there's this famous nightlife photographer called the Cobra Snake. This guy, Mark Hunter, I think it was, out in LA. And there are a bunch of copycat sites around the world, in London and New York. And I looked at that and I was like, man, this looks really cool. I had a very narrow definition of what cool was back then. And so, I ran into Wes, this guy Wes, one night, and we started chatting. I was like, I had this idea to try and, run, set up this website and start posting photos and to see if we could turn it into, a business. And he was on board, and there was no capital cost or anything because he had all the equipment already, so there's at least no upfront cost to us. And it was like $500 to do the site. To help with some of to help my one of my old roommates help build out the back end for the image upload and displaying and stuff like that. And then we just jumped straight into it, and we were out 4 or 5 nights a week, shooting, meeting people, getting the connections that we needed in order to start charging for it. And within about 6 months, we had really figured out. I mean, not that we had any real plan. We everything was a constant process of trial and error. But we did start getting people approaching us to work. Within a few months, then by 6 months, we'll kind of we had consistent weekly work coming in, and that grew from there.
So how did you seek out work? I know you mentioned you started out going to different events. Was it a very targeted approach where you tried and talked to the right people, event organizers, or did people find you through your website?
Right. Yeah. So it was a mix. So I mean, Sydney's it's actually quite a large city. 5 million people, but the circles that we were moving in were very, very small, and the promoters of a lot of the events at these clubs would see our imagery and would love it because there was nothing else like that being done at the time. It was sort of very candid, approach to photography. Nothing being done at the time in Sydney, at least. As I said to you, we took inspiration and basically copied an existing model and took it to Sydney. This guy Mark's website, the Cobra Snake, and promoters would see our work. They would love it. They would say, "I want you to shoot my next event," and we would say, okay, this is how much we're charging. They would say yes, because it was always pretty cheap comparatively compared to the sort of the budgets we got to work with later on. Went from there, and then they introduced us to other people, and it just spread naturally. There's a lot of word of mouth. As I said, it's a small community. There are several owners of these clubs that own several different bars. So if you crack one, and then you've got work at 6 of these establishments or whatever,
right,
all at once, and so that required us to to start hiring people. But ultimately it was a mix of just being out there and in that environment, as I said, 4 or 5 times a week, and then just producing good work, original work.
Oh, that's fantastic. So how did you get from after that first 6 months where you finally got clients going to building up the agency and eventually coming to the United States?
Right. Actually, there's one thing I should also mention in relation to your last question is that the way we got people to go to the website, we basically took this photograph of, it's kind of like this scantily clad girl. She was actually a friend of my sister's. We took a photograph of her, and we made stickers with the site's URL, and handed those out to everyone that we photographed, and we stuck them up everywhere, and those, those were effectively our calling card or our business card. And so that's actually how we originally drove traffic to the site, when no one knew who we were or what we were doing, and then it spread from there. Yeah,
that's so cool. Yeah. So your website would just be image galleries of different nightlife events in the city.
Yeah, at the start, absolutely. And as I said to you, we started getting more demand, and so that led to us finding other people, usually young guys and girls our age. Some of them had some exposure to photography, but most of them didn't.
Right.
Our philosophy was basically, if they have the right attitude and the right personality, then we can teach them how to use this camera. Digital cameras, you don't have to deal with film, and there's no constraints, so you can shoot 1,000 images a night if you want to, and learn very, very, very quickly. So that's what we did, and it went from there. And then we started proactively reaching out to record labels, and we had managed to get press passes to a bunch of, because Australia's got a really, really phenomenal music scene and a really strong festival scene as well.
Right.
And so there's some fantastic music festivals in the country during the summer. And so we got press passes, and that was a huge coup. We were very happy, to be recognized as like an official, as official enough to get media accreditation. And then we started shooting those festivals, and once again, the work was original enough, unique enough, that we eventually, ended up getting hired to become the official photographers for a number of these festivals. And that was really cool. Some of them, led to us touring around the world. Oh, not around the world, sorry. So touring around Australia with, musicians from all around the world.
Right.
Yeah, so that was neat. And it was really this gradual process. There was no sort of, lightning strike moment where everything exploded. It just grew and grew and grew, one day at a time.
Gotcha. So what would you say your secret sauce was? I know you mentioned a little bit about adopting this successful model of photography that someone else implemented. At Mark Hunter, I believe that was his name.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned having, the stickers, passing out stickers around. So in addition to those two things, did you also leverage social media, or what would you say differentiated you guys from your other competitors? As I'm sure there were many.
Yeah, the points of differentiation were the actual photographs themselves. We really focused on trying to have an artistic quality to them. Most of the sites out there were just terrible. There was no sensibility. There was no narrative. There was no real thought put into the actual images themselves. And so that was a point of differentiation for us that was incredibly important. What else did we do? And then just our attitudes. One of the things we tried to do was to be in the center of the party, not on the fringes. And that was one of our mantras that we tried to maintain. So rather than, not being an outsider, we always wanted to be the insider at every single event we're at. Even when we're, touring, with these famous, musicians, even trying to get on their good side, you know what I mean? And to the point where they could trust us. It didn't matter what, the situation was. That was always a sort of singular focus to us. And we think that that's one reason that, one approach that led to such what we thought were great images.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And just to round out your question, in regards to social media, we did, but we were around a little bit beforehand. So MySpace was around, and so we tried to get that going. We came up when MySpace was at the peak of its popularity, and then we also started trying to get Facebook going. It had some success, but it wasn't. It was always a sort of it was a mixed bag because we never really pushed it. I think that if we had been around, so if I was a bit younger, and we'd come up when Instagram was really rocketing, to popularity, I think we could have made significantly more money with significantly less work because of the capacity to build huge followings. And with the shift we see now where, a good photographer can't just take great images, they also need to have distribution baked in as well. So they need, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers or more. And that's the value there as well. The value add to your clients is not just, I take great images. It's also I can get them seen, by many people.
Yeah, because I think I heard the saying recently, and it says 20% of your time should be on content creation and 80% should be on content promotion.
Right. Yeah.
Which is true, but very, very sad.
Yeah, it is. But it's a hyper competitive space right now. I mean, the barriers to entry have plummeted, and so you really need to focus on that, and while simultaneously finding a point of difference.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So tell me, how did you then move from Australia to New York? And you mentioned that was also through photography as well.
Yes. Yeah. So I had taken a trip to Japan and Europe, and then to New York was the final leg of that trip. And I was going to spend 1 week here, and it ended up being 2, and then 3, and then I had to get back to Australia because we had gigs that we had to shoot. And I'd fallen in love with the city, and I got back to Australia, and I like to say that I was like depressed for a whole year because I was just so desperately wanted to be back. I was just blown away by the city's diversity and complexity, and I just needed to be around that environment. It was just such a wonderful creative atmosphere. And I spent the next year trying to figure out how I could get over to New York. And so the first thing I did, I managed to put together a portfolio and submit it to this program at SVA, the School of Visual Arts. And it's called the Photo Global Program. So it was basically, I think it was like six of us from all around the world, most of them from Europe. We had one girl who was from Palestine. I was from Australia, and then I think the rest were, from France, Switzerland, Germany. Yeah, I can't remember where else. And we went into this program. It was a 1-year program for sort of established photographers that were looking to just, leverage, New York's, photography community and artistic, the artistic environment here, to just basically become better photographers. So it was a weird program. I don't know if it still exists, but they basically tried. The premise was you're in between undergrad and postgrad. That's the idea, and you're not from the United States. They wanted us to bring a sort of international set of insights or ideas or cultural tastes, to the students that we interacted in, because we obviously shared both. We could take both undergraduate and postgraduate classes. So I did that. That was a year program, and then after that, I'd had enough material, in addition to everything that I'd done in Australia, to get a visa to live here and to work here, and and so that's kind of what I did. And then I started shooting here, shooting for magazines. I did a lot of fashion stuff and a lot of music stuff as well. That's how that went. Is that all clear?
Yeah. So were you still working for your company in Australia, or were you kind of off on your own at that point?
Yeah, you're making me bring up very old memories I haven't thought about. So I'm trying to like piece together this history as we talk. So I did continue to work with the company. We tried to make it work as best we could, but I was kind of working 8 p.m. till 3 a.m. New York time, because I was calling clients, speaking to clients, just trying to operate on sort of Australian business hours. That lasted about 4 or 5 months, and then it got to the point where I was like, this is ridiculous. This isn't going to work. And so I took a step back from that and handed that off. But I still flew back quite regularly to shoot larger campaigns or larger projects that came up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was trying to get the company based. The initial idea was to base the company here as well, or expand it here. But when I moved here, I was so sort of bombarded with all these other influences and ideas and insights into photography and art culture.
Right.
That I wanted to really move away from what I had been doing in Australia and towards sort of, I don't know, something with a unique twist or a unique point of view, or something that encapsulated or embraced all of these new influences I was that were around me at that time. So that began this huge exploration, and ultimately led me to stop taking photographs. But that's a little bit away.
Yeah. Okay. So on the same line of train of thought, why don't we fast forward to your decision to stop taking photography and into getting into design, and how you eventually started Domino to work with other freelancers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was shooting commercially here in New York, and I decided to start, and I just wanted to, once again, the issue was constraint. I felt that I wanted to explore, just keep pushing myself, basically. I always wanted to keep moving. And so the next logical path for me to take was to begin exploring, what they call like fine art photography, and to start exhibiting my work. And so I started getting really conceptual, and did that for with my commercial work for a couple of years, and it was just getting kind of weirder and weirder. and I really was attempting to actually make this transition from commercial photography to fine art photography, and to establish like an artistic career. But it was always kind of half-hearted. It didn't feel totally right, and I was struggling. I was really struggling, to make it happen. I had a few exhibitions here in New York and Australia and Europe, but I don't know, the premise of existing within like the broader artistic community wasn't very appealing for me. I found it incredibly, I don't know, like overbearing, or I don't know, I just couldn't identify with myself, like establishing or attempting to establish this artistic career over multiple decades. Ultimately,
right?
That's kind of it takes many years, and you can invest many years of your life into your art, and there's no sort of safety net. You either succeed or you don't, and I got to the point where I realized that's not what I wanted to be doing, and I looked back and realized that photography had been essentially a 10-year tangent that I'd gone down, because my original passion, I told you, was entrepreneurship and business, and also actually technology. I had been exposed to technology from a very, very, very young age. Once again, thanks to my parents, and I was sort of in my teenage. I was like a teenager back in the late 90s, when the first major tech boom was happening. I wanted to actually try and get out to Silicon Valley, and I was actually going to have a career in tech, working for a huge technology company, before I decided just to try university first. And and so it was kind of cool, and this is one of the beautiful things about life, is that you look back and it's like, wow, I spent 10 years doing this thing, and I'm going to put it to bed, and I'm going to move on. But then you realize, wait a second, in my case, it was like I originally wanted to be doing technology and business, and now I'm ready to take that step. But I'm so grateful for everything photography has given me. And so even though it was a tangent, so to speak, now looking back, it also gave me the opportunity to live in New York. And it gave me a sort of a cultural or aesthetic taste and sensibility that I otherwise absolutely would not have. And the set of experiences gives me a unique point of view, and so I absolutely wouldn't change a thing. But yeah, it got to the point where I was like, okay, this is what I want to get into. I've quite a few, I'm fortunate to have quite a few friends out in San Francisco and here in New York that are in technology. And so I started just chatting to them and figuring out what was the path and what could I do. And I'd had some design experience through photography, through printing books. I printed a couple of photo books, and I designed our company's website, stuff like that. So I had some exposure, but nothing substantial. And then I just started teaching myself design, teaching myself user experience design, relearning color and color theory, reapplying the experience I had with composition, for example, but within a design context, not a photography context. So basically, once again, I just started teaching myself, and I was looking at the problems that photographers faced, and thought there'd be an opportunity to create essentially a file transfer service that locks the files until the client pays you. So they pay with their credit card or whatever, and then they get the download link. And so that was the first concept I had, and I built on a prototype, and it was okay, it was going, but it wasn't 100% there. Something was missing. And so I was getting user feedback and all the rest of it, getting a lot of insight into what did and didn't work with the product. And I actually gave a presentation on what I was doing, and at this kind of combined arts tech event that a friend of mine put on. And at that event was Chris, who became my co-founder. And he and I, he was looking to take the next step in his career, and he was really interested in pursuing a startup. And so I said, well, I've been doing this thing, and this is where I'm at with it. I don't know if you're interested. And he's like, yeah, this is cool. This has got potential. And so we started working together very slowly, trying to figure out what we had and what we didn't have, and that's evolved significantly over time to what we're attempting to build now. So originally it was a digital lockbox for photographers. And that was the original concept, and that evolved to the platform we're endeavoring to build now, so the platform to help freelancers find work through their friends. So sorry for talking in like one long stream, but that is essentially the sort of play-by-play of how I transitioned out of photography, started teaching myself design, found a problem to solve, and then had that problem kind of grow larger and larger. Until we get to where we are now, which is figuring out jobs for freelancers.
No, I think that's great. The coolest thing is that you're able to look back at the past 10 years and see how the decision you took to pursue your own path on photography. You could see everything you have right now is because of the decisions that you made. And I think it's particularly satisfying. You can look back with no regrets when you can kind of trace back all these great things that are happening to you right now based off of certain decisions that you made. And a lot of people don't even have that chance. A lot of people, I'm sure we both have friends who talk about wanting to do something, but a few years later, they're doing the same thing. They never get the chance because they never take the chance.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that speaks testaments to your approach to life and how you were able to kind of let go of photography and to pursue the new path that you're on right now and to go full speed ahead. So what I'm curious is, how did you go from your original idea of the digital lockbox to protect photographers when they're getting payments from clients to a platform for freelancers? Because I don't know if it's just me. I can't really see the pivot there. It seems like a fundamentally different problem. But I'll let you speak more about that.
Yeah, I don't think I know the connection. And this is one of the beautiful things about time, is that these, time gives you the perspective and the space to be able to have these ideas, these concepts, or these endeavors evolve and shift, based upon, just through the process of sort of thinking and working and letting them, find their form in due time. And wow, how did that transition happen? Okay, so we I basically expanded the digital lockbox idea. And this is a great mistake I made. This is a very common mistake that new like user experience designers make, is not listening to the wrong people. I imagine it's very, very common. So anyway, obviously, I'm teaching myself user experience design, understanding, the sort of this intersection of psychology and design in order to affect how people utilize, your website or your application or whatever. And obviously a big part of that is user testing. And so I was getting feedback and listening to not enough people. And I was I was just too eager to kind of keep building and keep moving without taking the necessary time for contemplation to really assess, like, hey, is this feedback valid or isn't it? Anyway, and so I spent more time and more money, because I'd actually sold all my camera equipment. I'd lots and lots and lots of camera gear, and I sold it all to build this, help fund this prototype. And so I built it out from a digital lockbox into more of an invoicing tool, and so its complexity grew over time, and I swear there must be hundreds of these invoicing tools out there these days that people build. It's like, I'm a freelancer, invoicing sucks, I'm going to build an invoicing tool. And so I did that, and that was around the time that I ran into Chris, and he and I started speaking, and there's always been a broader vision for what we're trying to do. It's just not relevant to discuss that right now, just because you need to have a pretty succinct message, so people don't look at you being like, what are you trying to say? If you say
absolutely
500 things, you say nothing, right? And so Chris and I actually went out of town, out of New York for a weekend to kind of get a fresh perspective. We rented an Airbnb, and we sort of mapped out. We got a whole bunch of post-it notes, and we mapped out all the sort of the vision, the different opportunities we thought there were, and what we wanted to, what we wanted to do, what was an interesting and interesting challenge to pursue. And that's how we started working on this piece that has, this endeavor that's become this platform to help freelancers find work through their friends. But it was just the problem was just listening to the wrong feedback, losing my way a bit, giving his presentation, meeting Chris, he and I chatting over a number of months, and then deciding to work together, and then saying, hey, what are we really trying to do, and is this the best way to achieve it? And so that's what led us to start pursuing building some of these other tools and prototypes and MVPs to figure out how do you get a platform, how do you get a marketplace? Effectively, it's a marketplace. So how do you get a marketplace off the ground?
Yeah, and I want to get into Domino specifically, but before that, I think I can see a clear common thread between all the things you've been doing, even though maybe.
Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah. I have some insights, right? No, I think the common lining is that everything you've done so far points back to you taking action. The pivot from your initial idea to have a lockbox to a platform for freelancers. Whether or not the pivot makes logical sense at face value doesn't matter. It's the fact that you're actually going out trying new things, and that opens you up to opportunities to change course. You're constantly moving forward. You might not be in the same straight line, but you're constantly moving in that general direction, which in your current case is entrepreneurship, making a difference, solving meaningful problems. So
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah. So not that crazy. So let's talk about Domino.
Sure.
That's obviously how you and I met, and I have some insights into how Domino works as well. But for people who are listening, what is Domino, and what problem are you trying to tackle, and what is kind of that final utopian vision?
Sure. So Domino is a platform for freelancers to find work through their friends. There are several problems that all freelancers have. Freelancing just sucks, quite frankly, and like it's an absolute mess. And the biggest problem is work. You can't be a freelancer, if you don't have any work coming in, and it's something that everyone struggles with. And there hasn't been a real clear-cut path to make it easier for freelancers to find work without investing a lot of time in platforms like Upwork, which have their own problems. In terms of investing time in sort of manually reaching out to your wider network.
Right.
It just takes, everything with freelancing takes a ton of time. And so we thought to ourselves, Chris and I said, well, if we can make it easier for freelancers to get work that's like really well paying from from clients, that are trustworthy, then we might be onto something, and we will make it much, much easier for people to become freelancers. I think freelancing is like a really outdated term, and I'm trying to figure out one that's more relevant. I don't think solo entrepreneur cuts it, but literally freelancing is a term for I think it's like the 19th century for mercenaries, who literally had a lance that they would pledge to whoever paid them. So that's the origin. So
no kidding.
There's a lot around freelancing that's sort of antiquated or just dysfunctional. And so we decided to see if we could tackle this jobs problem first and foremost, so that more people can become freelancers, and successful freelancers, faster. And so what we've found is that the majority of established freelancers find work, in consistent repeat work, through their networks. But these networks are often disconnected. They, there's very little overlap. And so what we're endeavoring to do is to connect all these disparate networks together so that these jobs can be distributed, further, and sort of the right job can find the right freelancer. And we're doing this because we believe that freelancing, which is effectively like one person, solo entrepreneurship. That is ultimately what it is. We see that as the future of. We see it as one possible future for work. We hope that if anyone can become a freelancer, then they can establish their own values and goals around their careers, and they can live, hopefully, a more meritocratic professional life. By not being bound by so much by politics. We'll never get away from it completely. But the idea is, if everyone has access to the same shared knowledge and shared tools, then it's really up to and you've got this operating from the same foundation, then anyone should be able to build their own business, and achieve success on their own terms. So that is what we would like to see, to basically reduce the barriers to entry to freelancing down to as close to zero as possible, so that it becomes an option for people, so that anyone can choose this path, without all the fear and stress and uncertainty that comes with it.
No, I agree completely. As a freelancer as well, I think this is a big problem, not knowing where your next project's going to come from. And I've tried I've tried like outreach I created spreadsheets of potential clients, things like that, reached out to them, and those are all just cold approaches that didn't really work. I found that my best success rate has come from either referrals from friends or existing clients. So it's really about warm connections. And I see Domino as being something that could become maybe like an Uber of sorts for freelancing, because the concept of the sharing economy is that if your car is going to be in your garage like 90% of the time, you're not extracting the full value out of it. It's the same thing with work. Just because you're in an office for 8 hours a day doesn't mean you're productive. It's a time-based system. So if people could better leverage human resources, labor, that's really where freelancing can shine through.
Yeah.
So I'm very much in agreement with the vision here, and just excited to see how that plays out. So in terms of where Domino is at right now, what are some things you're working on, if you're able to share that information, and also what's kind of the roadmap ahead for the next year or so?
Right.
What are you looking the most forward to?
Right. So right now, I mean, anyone that's studied or has worked at, or tried to build a marketplace business knows how incredibly challenging they are. So our focus right now is on getting traction effectively, on being able to help facilitate these this exchange or this sharing of excess work. We've got a few ideas on how to do it, but yeah, it's a constant process of experimentation, and so we've got the product, or a version of the product that's live right now. It's everything's kind of invite only in private beta, because we want to keep the quality of the the members of the platform. To basically we want all of them to know that they've been invited specifically, that they're really good at what they do, and they can trust one another, right? Because you're trying to connect these different networks of people that don't know each other.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that their sort of baseline is, okay, anyone else here that's in this community, must be really good, if there's some kind of filtering mechanism, right?
Sure.
To screen for their sort of technical professional ability. So I mean, there's just a lot that we're experimenting with and trying to figure out how to make this work. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go into the nuts and bolts, but
Right, of course.
but it's that's really the key step for us right now, is focusing entirely on what that looks like. How do you incentivize people to share the work? How big does the total network size need to be in order to facilitate an adequate number of jobs being shared on the platform per like X unit of time? This one of the challenges with freelancing is so many unknowns, not just about like being an individual freelancer, but also the actual like, I don't know what you'd say, like the labor definition or whatever, like the labor category of freelancers. There is so much that's unknown, because it's never really been measured by government bodies, by, for example, the US's Department of Labor. I think they're starting to. I believe I remember reading a news report or a press release saying that they were going to begin trying to capture and learn more about the size of this, size of freelancing in America. But to my knowledge, no other developed economies are doing it. And so it's just this giant cloud that obscures everything.
It's just so hard, because with freelancing, even if you talk about legal entities, there's so many ways to go about it. So it's hard for the government to track. It could be a sole proprietorship, LLC, C corp, and how there's no way for the government to know on paper what you actually are. So it's messy on all fronts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and this this fragmentation is a problem in freelancing as well. There's no consistency. There's no like defined path, defined model of freelancing. There is just constant fragmentation around, how do you freelance? What's the best approach? Where do you learn? So educational resources, the tools, business tools, social safety nets, that don't exist. So there's so many different pieces of this that either aren't built or are half built, or that are sort of catering to a different audience and kind of shoehorned into making it into working for freelancers, kind of, ineffectively, but functionally it's okay. So there's a lot of pieces here that need to be solved in order to make freelancing or whatever it's whatever the future of work outside of the corporation, whatever that looks like, in order to make that reality.
Yeah, and I like how you talked about the future of work. So we're actually on a few of our last questions, but I wanted to kind of shift the tone a little bit. because we've talked a lot about freelancing. We always kind of mention it in like, oh, this could be better. This is messy. This sucks. But there's a reason why both of us have been freelancers. Both of us are freelancing, and it's because there's a lot of great things about it. So before we wrap up, I wanted to get into some of the great things about freelancing, just so just so people know.
Yeah.
And so, in your opinion, what are some of the things that you love about freelancing that makes you want to make it easier and more accessible to the average individual?
Yeah, I think it comes down to empowerment, right? So
Yeah.
if you can be the arbiter of your success, if you are the one that define success, it doesn't have to be monetary, but you're the one that says, this is what I believe in, these are the values that I hold dear, and these are the goals that I want to reach, and I'm gonna,
Yes.
And that's up to me to define. I think that's incredibly powerful and incredibly empowering. And so I think empowerment is a huge one. I think flexibility is enormous as well. The idea, as you mentioned it earlier, the idea that traditionally we've leveraged the concept of time as a measure of productivity. The more hours in the office or the more hours in the factory equals a higher rate of productivity. And obviously all the labor studies and psychological studies have been done prove that that's not true. That we only have so many hours of focused work, in us every day. And so I think my hope is that that'll catch on to, to more and more companies. So there's benefit, even, obviously not just for freelancers, but for sort of full-time salaried employees as well. In terms of freelancing, the benefits of freelancing, empowerment is one, flexibility is one. I think there's something about the self-directed path that I think is incredibly powerful as well. The idea of because obviously our professional lives are so incredibly important to who we are. They make up a big component of our identity, and they define a lot about the life that we end up living. And so, I think a life that is defined on your own terms is incredibly important to one's well-being, to one's evolution and growth as a human being. And and it forces you to question established norms. There's so much sort of cultural bias, and so many sort of established ideas and notions that we encounter every day in society without ever questioning where they came from, how they kind of became stuck into the sort of the cultural kind of unconscious. But there's a lot of these things, and I think it's important for us to question everything that makes up our lives or the broader lives, or the broader elements of society, in order to say, do I believe in this? Do I not? What do I value? What don't I value? And I think that that's incredibly powerful. It's far easier to do it in freelancing when you have that kind of flexibility through your work, to be able to figure out, what makes sense to you and what doesn't. I feel like I'm rambling a bit because it's really hard.
No, I think it's really interesting because your answer to this question was very much a way of life, an identity, empowerment. A lot of these spiritual and emotional aspects. I would go on to add that I think being able to own your time is very valuable because maybe not beginning freelancers, but the top freelancers, they have a way of pricing themselves in a way that they get a lot more money. They price themselves based on the value they provide, and therefore they're able to charge a lot more as opposed to charge based on time, maybe like an hourly rate of like $20. That's what I did when I first started. So in that sense, from a spiritual and financial fulfillment perspective, I think freelancing, if done correctly, can cover both of those things. The difficulty is sourcing projects. That's kind of the be all end all. If you don't have projects, you can't freelance. I guess you also have to have the skills, but We're just gonna assume that everyone we're talking about has the skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually to your point on initially charging $20 an hour when you first started, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I see an intersection of two things there. One is ignorance, and one is a lack of confidence. If you knew how to price your services in a way that clients, are happy with, if or happy to pay, and if you had the knowledge to be able to communicate the value, that you bring to a project, then you'd be able to be charging confidently, comfortably, a lot more than you were when you first started out. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that all new freelancers, or almost all new freelancers, seem to consistently make. And so I think it is a lack of access to the knowledge required to understand how to come up with a fair price that also takes into consideration the fact that you need to pay, for your benefits and insurance and savings for retirement. So a lot of the costs that are usually borne by an employer. Being able to actually technically determine, okay, this is the minimum amount I can earn per hour, per project, and then having the confidence to be able to sell that as well and to articulate that value are enormous problems. And so that's a big piece you're talking about that we don't have time to get into, unfortunately, but knowledge.
that could be like 10 podcast episodes, because I think most people in freelancing realize that maybe 10% of your time is spent on the actual work, and 90% of time is spent on everything else
running
besides
a business.
your work.
Yeah, you got it.
So,
and that's why we set up Spot. Domino Spot is like a knowledge base, community created knowledge base for practical information on how to freelance. So we basically call them step-by-step guides on how to get stuff done, from how to register a company, to pricing yourself, to writing the perfect email, to finding your target market. There is such sort of fragmented educational resources out there, or educational resources out there for freelancers that don't really hit the mark. We really wanted to create something that was focused on practicality, and that was short and concise, and that led. The idea is you read one of these and you basically have an outcome at the end. So whether it's figuring out your target market or registering your company, it's like run through these steps and then you'll get this this outcome.
And that's one of the great things of being able to be part of a community like Domino. Everyone else is a resource as well. So Absolutely. I think there's the added benefit of sharing projects when projects come along, but there's also a knowledge base, because you can only rely on the other people in the community, since information is so fragmented out there. So to conclude, what is the best way that people can learn more about you, learn more about Domino, and kind of follow you on your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously our website would be the number one destination. So it's wearedomino.com. Pretty standard. There's no superfluous, drop nouns or misspellings there. Once you get to the wearedomino.com website, there is a link where you can join our Slack community. And that's a great way to meet new freelancers, if you need to chat with me, or you want to follow up on any of these questions or any of the discussions that we've had today, Victor. Any of the listeners are welcome to join that Slack community and send me a message. So
awesome. So I'll include all the information to that in the show notes as well. So you guys can just click on it and be taken straight there. But that's it for today's episode. So I want to really thank you again for hopping on. I know you'll probably be doing work on Domino right after we end the call.
Yeah, more than happy to help out, and assuming I did, and to give time for the members of our community. So I hope what I shared was valuable or insightful or interesting, even in small part to anyone out there. Thanks, man.
And that's a wrap for my interview with Alex. If you want to find out more about Alex, Domino, and his adventures, along with more information about everything we talked about, visit theremotelifestyle.com/6. There you'll find the show notes for this week's episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Remote Podcast. Be sure to leave a review of the show so that I can continue to improve it. If you like what you heard, go ahead and hit subscribe so that you never miss out on an episode. If you're ready to take the leap and live the remote lifestyle, text the word remote to 38470 to sign up for our free email course titled Become a Digital Nomad in 7 Steps, even if you have no idea where to start. The course will take you from sitting in your office wondering what to do with your life to having a plan of action to live and work remotely. So make sure you don't miss out by texting the word remote to 38470 or by going to the URL theremotelifestyle.com/remote. That's all for now, and I'll see you on the next episode.